The great chamber of the Galactic Council was vast and cold. Lights of 100 different colors floated in the air above the gathered representatives of 12 alien species. Each species sat in their own section, separated by invisible barriers of pride and ancient tradition. In the center of this chamber, standing alone on a platform of polished stone, was Ambassador of Earth. She was 53 years old with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. She had spent 20 years of her life working toward this moment. 20 years of learning alien languages and customs. 20 years of building relationships and trust. 20 years of believing that humanity could find its place among the stars. Now she watched all of that work crumble to dust. The High Speaker of the rose from his seat. He was tall and thin, his body made of something that looked like living crystal. Light passed through him and scattered into rainbows on the floor. His voice was like wind chimes in a storm when he spoke. "The Council has reached its decision regarding the species known as humanity," he announced. "After careful consideration of all evidence and testimony, we find that humans are not suitable for membership in the galactic community." Kept her face calm even as her heart sank. She had expected this. The signs had been clear for months, but hearing the words spoken aloud in this sacred chamber made them painfully real. The High Speaker continued without emotion. "Humanity has demonstrated patterns of behavior that we cannot accept. Your species is aggressive and quick to violence. Your history is filled with wars fought over land, resources, and ideas. You have weapons capable of destroying your own world, and you have come close to using them more than once." From the section where they sat, a sound like laughter echoed through the chamber. There were creatures with hard shells and many legs. They had never hidden their contempt for humans. Their representative clicked his mandibles together in amusement. "Furthermore," the High Speaker said, "your technology is primitive by galactic standards. You have only recently discovered faster-than-light travel, and your understanding of it is limited at best. You would be a burden on the Council, requiring resources and protection that could be better used elsewhere." Wanted to argue. She wanted to point out that humans had achieved in 2 centuries what most species took to accomplish. She wanted to remind them that humanity's aggression had also driven them to explore, to discover, to reach beyond their small blue world and touch the stars. But she knew her words would change nothing. The decision had been made long before this session began. "Humanity is hereby expelled from Council space," the High Speaker declared. "You will return to your solar system and remain there. You are forbidden from traveling beyond your own star. Any human vessel found in Council territory will be destroyed without warning. You have 30 standard days to comply." The chamber fell silent, looked around at the faces of the representatives. The serpentine beings with scales that shifted color with their moods showed scales of deep blue, the color of regret. They had abstained from the vote but had not spoken in humanity's defense. The others showed nothing at all. Took a slow breath and spoke into the silence. Her voice was steady and clear. "We will remember this," she said simply. Then she turned and walked out of the chamber with her head held high. The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks. Spent most of that time alone in her cabin, thinking about what would come next. She knew that the news of humanity's exile would cause anger and despair. Some would want to fight. Others would want to hide. But also knew her people. Humans did not give up easily. When her ship arrived in Earth orbit, she found Director Samuel Price waiting for her. He was the head of the United Earth Defense Council, an old soldier with white hair and eyes that had seen too much. He met her in the docking bay and walked with her to the briefing room without saying a word. Inside, a dozen of Earth's most important leaders sat around a long table. Generals, scientists, politicians, and diplomats. They all looked at with the same question in their eyes. "It is done," she told them. "We have 30 days to withdraw all our ships and personnel from Council space. After that, we are on our own." The room erupted in angry voices. General Stone slammed his fist on the table and demanded that they fight. Senator Wells argued that they should appeal the decision. Dr. Henry, the chief scientist of the Mars Research Station, insisted that they needed more time to study the alien technology they had acquired. Samuel Price let them argue for several minutes. Then he raised his hand, and the room fell silent. "Fighting would be suicide," he said calmly. "We have 12 ships capable of interstellar travel. The Council has thousands. An appeal would be pointless. They have made their feelings about us very clear, and studying their technology will only get us so far. We need to find our own path." He stood and walked to the window that looked out over Earth. The planet hung in the darkness like a blue and white jewel, beautiful and fragile. "Humanity has faced extinction before," he continued. "Ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters of every kind. Each time we survived because we adapted, because we refused to accept that our story was over. This is no different." He turned back to face the room. "In 30 days, we will be alone in the universe. Every other intelligent species will be our enemy or will want nothing to do with us. We will have no allies, no trade partners, no protection. But we will also have no limits. No one will tell us what we can or cannot do. No one will hold us back." Watched as his words sank in. The anger in the room began to shift into something else, something harder and more determined. "Call every nation," Samuel ordered. "Every scientist, every engineer, every dreamer and builder on this planet. Tell them that the old divisions are over. Tell them that starting today, there is only one nation and one people. Tell them that humanity has been given a gift, even if it does not feel like one. We have been given a reason to become what we were always meant to be." Commander Lisa Grant, the youngest person in the room, leaned forward with fire in her eyes. "What exactly are we meant to be, Director?" Samuel smiled, and for a moment he looked like a young man again. "Something the galaxy has never seen before, something they will never forget." In a basement laboratory in Chicago, a young physicist named Daniel Harper worked through the night. He had no idea that his calculations would change the fate of humanity forever. He only knew that there was a pattern in the numbers that no one else had seen, a frequency hidden in the fabric of space itself. He called it the Harper frequency, and within 5 years, it would allow human ships to travel in ways the Galactic Council had never imagined. But that night, Daniel Harper was just a young man with a dream and the stubborn refusal to accept that some things were impossible. He was, in other words, perfectly human. 100 years passed, and the galaxy forgot about humanity. The Council species occasionally mentioned the primitive creatures from the small blue world, but only as a warning to others. "See what happens to those who are not worthy," they would say. "See how they fade into nothing." But humanity had not faded. Humanity had been busy. The Harper frequency changed everything. Daniel Harper's discovery revealed that space was not a single fabric, but many layers folded on top of each other. The Council species traveled through hyperspace, using lanes and gates that had existed for millions of years. They thought this was the only way to cross the vast distances between stars. They were wrong. Human scientists learned to fold space itself. They called it fold space travel, and it allowed their ships to slip between the layers of reality and emerge anywhere in the galaxy in moments. No gates, no lanes, no limits. Director Samuel Price did not live to see the first fold space ship complete its maiden voyage. He died in his sleep at the age of 91, surrounded by his family and the leaders who had become his closest friends. But his daughter took his place, and she carried his vision forward with fierce determination. Price was different from her father. Where Samuel had been calm and patient was fire and motion. She pushed the scientists to work faster. She demanded more ships, more colonies, more progress. Some called her harsh. Others called her exactly what humanity needed. Under her leadership, the first colony ships launched in secret. They slipped through fold space to worlds the Council had never visited. worlds in systems that conventional hyperspace could not reach. Within 20 years, humanity had established colonies on 12 planets. Within 50 years, that number had grown to 47. Each colony was designed to survive on its own. They had their own farms, their own factories, their own governments. But they were also connected by quantum communication networks that allowed instant contact across any distance. A message sent from Earth reached the farthest colony in less than a second. The Council's communication systems, which relied on relay stations and signal boosters, seemed primitive by comparison. Captain Cole was born on the Mars colony 60 years after the exile. He grew up hearing stories of Earth's blue oceans and green forests, places he had never seen. He dreamed of exploration, of finding new worlds and new wonders. When he was old enough, he joined the United Earth Fleet and quickly rose through the ranks. His ship was called the Wanderer, and it was the fastest vessel humanity had ever built. Its crew of 200 were the best explorers, scientists, and soldiers Earth had to offer. Their mission was to go beyond the edge of the galaxy itself, to places no living being had visited in millions of years. The journey took 3 months. They passed through regions of space that were empty and dark, where no stars burned and no planets turned. Sometimes stood at the observation window and stared into that darkness, wondering what secrets it held. They found their answer on a dead world circling a dying star. The ruins covered an entire continent. Towers of black metal rose toward the sky, their surfaces covered in writing that no one could read. Underground chambers stretched for miles, filled with machines that still hummed with power after countless ages. Whatever species had built this place had been far more advanced than anything the galaxy had ever known. Dr. Laura, the ship's chief scientist and a distant relative of Ambassador, spent weeks studying the ruins. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and endless curiosity. Nothing escaped her notice. They called themselves the Architects, she told one evening as they walked through a vast underground library. They were here before any of the current species evolved, before the Council, before the hyperspace lanes, before everything. What happened to them? Asked. Laura shook her head. I do not know. The records are incomplete, but they left something behind, something meant to be found. She led him to a chamber at the heart of the complex. In the center of the room stood a pillar of light that pulsed with gentle warmth. When Laura approached it, the light seemed to recognize her. Images began to flow through the air around them. Stars and planets, equations and diagrams, knowledge beyond anything humanity had ever imagined. They seeded the galaxy with life, Laura whispered. They created the conditions for intelligence to evolve on thousands of worlds, and then they left this archive for whoever was curious enough to find it. Stared at the flowing images. Why us? Why did we find it and not the Council? Laura smiled. Because the Council stopped looking. They thought they knew everything worth knowing. They stayed on their comfortable worlds and traveled their safe hyperspace lanes and never wondered what might lie beyond. But we wondered. We always wonder. The archive contained scientific knowledge that would take generations to fully understand. New energy sources, new materials, new ways of manipulating matter and space and time. The architects had solved problems that the modern galaxy still struggled with, and they had preserved their solutions for anyone bold enough to seek them. Sent a message back to Earth. The words were simple, but their meaning was profound. We have found what we were looking for. Humanity's future is secured. Back on Earth, Price received the message in her office. She was old now, her hair white and her hands marked with age spots, but when she read's words, she smiled like a young woman. Father, she said to the empty room, I wish you could see this. We kept our promise. We became something they never expected. The knowledge from the Architect Archive spread across all of humanity's colonies. Scientists worked day and night to understand and apply what they had learned. New technologies emerged at a pace that would have seemed impossible a century before. But even as humanity grew stronger, they did not forget the lessons of their exile. They remembered how it felt to be cast out and condemned. They remembered the loneliness of those first years when every star seemed to belong to someone else. And they made a decision that would define them for generations to come. They would not become what the Council feared. They would not use their power to conquer or destroy. Instead, they would wait and watch and prepare. Because somewhere in the galaxy, something dark was stirring. The architects had left warnings along with their knowledge. Warnings about an ancient enemy that had driven them away. An enemy that would one day return. Humanity would be ready, not for revenge against the Council, but for a fight that would determine the fate of every living being in the galaxy. The silent century was ending, and the age of humanity was about to begin. The swarm came without warning. One day the outer colonies of the Empire were thriving worlds filled with billions of lives. The next day they were silent graves drifting through space. The first reports were confused and incomplete. A patrol ship sent a distress signal that lasted only seconds before cutting off. Then another colony went dark. Then another. By the time the Galactic Council understood what was happening, 30 systems had fallen. The enemy was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. They were machines, but not like the simple robots that served the Council species. These machines were alive in some terrible way. They thought. They adapted. They consumed everything in their path, breaking down planets and ships and bodies into raw materials to build more of themselves. The Council fleets responded with all their strength. Thousands of warships gathered to defend the of Prime. The greatest military force the galaxy had ever assembled waited in orbit, confident that nothing could stand against them. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the Council fleet was scattered wreckage, and the swarm descended on Prime like a plague of metal locusts. High Speaker of the watched the reports from his palace on the Council capital world. His crystalline body flickered with colors of fear and despair. In 300 years of life, he had never seen anything like this. The swarm could not be reasoned with. They could not be bribed or threatened or negotiated with. They simply consumed. "We must call for aid," said his advisor, a young named. "Every species in the galaxy must unite against this threat." Shook his head slowly. Who would come the care only for themselves? They are too far away, the others are too weak. "There is one other option," said quietly, "the humans." The High Speaker turned to stare at his advisor. The humans were exiled a century ago. They are primitives living in isolation. What could they possibly offer? "Perhaps nothing," admitted, "but we have nothing to lose by asking." And so, for the first time in 100 years, a message was sent to the Sol system. It was a simple plea broadcast on all frequencies. "To any who can hear, the Galactic Council requests assistance. We face a threat that may consume us all. If there is anyone who can help, we beg you to respond." On Earth, President received the message in the Situation Room of the global government headquarters. She was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and iron determination. Around her sat the leaders of humanity's military and scientific establishments. "They finally remembered we exist," said Admiral George with a bitter smile. He was a large man with a face and hands that had seen decades of service. "Should we remind them how they treated us?" President was quiet for a long moment. She thought about her grandmother, who had been alive during the exile. She thought about the stories of humiliation and rejection that every human child learned in school. She thought about all the reasons humanity had to say no. Then she thought about the billions of innocent beings on Prime who were dying, while she sat in her comfortable chair. "We did not spend a century building our strength so we could hide when others need help," she said finally. "We built it so we could protect those who cannot protect themselves, even those who wronged us." Admiral leaned forward. "Madam President, with respect, they would not have done the same for us." "No, they would not have," agreed. And that is exactly why we must, because we are better than what they believed us to be. Because the measure of a people is not how they treat their friends, but how they treat those who have given them every reason to turn away. The room was silent. Then Secretary of Defense Moore nodded slowly. "What are your orders, Madam President?" "Assemble the fleet, all of it, we go to Prime." 3 days later, the skies above Prime tore open. 200 human warships emerged from fold space portals, appearing from nowhere like ghosts materializing from thin air. The swarm, which had been methodically consuming the planet, turned to face this new threat. Captain Rachel Torres commanded the heavy cruiser Defiance from the heart of the formation. She was 34 years old, born on the colony world of New Hope, and she had trained her entire life for a moment like this. Her crew was linked through neural interfaces that allowed them to share thoughts and reactions instantly. They moved as one mind, one will, one purpose. "All ships engage," Admiral's voice came through the fleet-wide channel. "Show them what humanity can do." The battle was unlike anything the watching survivors had ever witnessed. Human ships did not fight like council vessels, which relied on massive firepower and thick armor. Human ships danced through space like living creatures. They appeared and disappeared, using micro-fold jumps to avoid enemy fire. Their weapons were precise and devastating, targeting the weak points of swarm vessels with surgical accuracy. Captain Torres pushed her ship forward into the thickest part of the enemy formation. Swarm vessels swarmed around her, but her crew responded to every threat before it fully developed. They had spent decades preparing for exactly this kind of fight. "Torres, pull back," ordered. "You are too deep in their formation." "Negative, Admiral," Torres replied calmly. "I have a clear shot at their command ship, taking it now." The Defiance's main cannon fired a beam of concentrated energy that cut through space like a blade of light. It struck the largest swarm vessel dead center, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the enemy ship began to break apart from the inside, its systems overloading and cascading failures. When the swarm command ship died, the smaller vessels hesitated. They were still dangerous, still deadly, but their coordination had been disrupted. The human fleet pressed the advantage, driving them back from Prime with relentless precision. 6 hours after it began, the battle was over. The swarm retreated into dark space, leaving behind fields of broken metal and the shocked survivors of a planet that had expected to die. Admiral's face appeared on every communication screen in the system. His expression was calm and professional, showing nothing of the exhaustion he felt. "This is Admiral George of the United Earth Fleet. The immediate threat has been neutralized. Medical teams and relief supplies are being transported to the surface. We ask nothing in return for this assistance. We came because it was the right thing to do." On the surface of Prime, a young woman stood in the ruins of her home and watched the human shuttles descend. She had lost her family in the attack. She had expected to lose her life. Instead, she watched as strange beings in white uniforms emerged from the shuttles and began treating the wounded without asking who they were or what they believed. She did not understand why the humans had come. Her leaders had always taught her that humans were dangerous and primitive, but these beings did not look dangerous. They looked tired and kind and determined to help. For the first time since the attack began, she allowed herself to hope. The months that followed the Battle of Prime changed the galaxy forever. The swarm had not been destroyed, only driven back. They regrouped in the dark spaces between stars and launched new attacks on other worlds. But now, whenever they appeared, human ships were there to meet them. 11 more worlds were saved by human intervention. The colony of, whose leaders had laughed at humanity's exile, was rescued by a fleet commanded by Captain Rachel Torres. The mining stations in the outer reach were defended by Admiral himself. Even the distant, a species so reclusive that few council members had ever met them, received aid when the swarm threatened there. Each time the pattern was the same. Human ships would appear through their impossible portals. They would fight with terrifying skill and coordination. And when the battle was over, they would offer food, medicine, and shelter to the survivors. They never demanded payment. They never asked for territory or resources. They simply helped, and then. The council species did not know what to make of this. Their entire understanding of power was based on exchange. You gave something to get something. Strength was used to take what you wanted. The idea that a species would risk their lives to save strangers without expecting anything in return was foreign to them. High Speaker spent many sleepless nights thinking about what he had witnessed. He remembered standing in the council chamber a century ago, voting to exile humanity. He remembered the contempt in his voice when he called them primitive and aggressive. He remembered Ambassador's quiet words, "We will remember this." Now he understood what she had meant. Humanity had remembered their exile, and they had chosen to respond with mercy instead of vengeance. When Ambassador returned to the council chamber, insisted on meeting her personally. She was very old now, over 150 years, kept alive by human medical technology that the council could barely comprehend. But her eyes were still sharp, and her voice was still clear. Ambassador said, bowing his crystalline head low, "I am honored that you agreed to come." Looked around the chamber where she had been humiliated so long ago. "I never thought I would stand here again," she admitted. "I spent many years angry at what happened in this room, but anger is a heavy thing to carry. Eventually, I learned to set it down." The formal session that followed was unprecedented in galactic history. One by one, the representatives of the council species rose to speak. Some offered apologies. Some asked questions about humanity's technology and how they had advanced so far so quickly. Some simply expressed gratitude for being saved from the swarm. The representative was a new individual, the grandson of the one who had laughed at humanity's exile. He crawled to the center of the chamber on all his legs and bowed his armored head to the floor in the deepest gesture of respect his species could offer. "My grandfather was wrong," he said, his voice clicking and humming through the translators. "We saw your aggression and assumed it was all you were. We did not understand that the same fire that drives you to fight also drives you to protect. We are ashamed of what we did, and we are grateful beyond words for what you have done." Listened to each speaker without interrupting. When all had finished, she rose slowly from her seat. The chamber fell silent. 100 years ago, I stood in this chamber and heard humanity condemned as unworthy of galactic civilization, she began. I was told that we were too aggressive, too violent, too primitive to be trusted, and perhaps in some ways that judgment was fair. We were young and reckless and full of anger. She paused, looking around at the assembled representatives. Many could not meet her eyes. "But what you did not understand was that our aggression came from love. We fight because we care deeply about protecting what matters to us. We are violent because we refuse to accept injustice. We are stubborn because we believe that impossible things can become possible if we work hard enough." She took a slow breath before continuing. "When you cast us out, you gave us a gift. You freed us from your expectations and your limits. You forced us to find our own path, and on that path we discovered something precious. We discovered what kind of people we wanted to become." The chamber was utterly silent. Even the environmental system seemed to have paused. "We do not wish to rejoin your council," said. "We have built something of our own, something that serves our people well. But we offer partnership freely given. Not because we need you, but because we believe that no species should face the darkness alone." High Speaker rose from his seat. His body glowed with colors of deep respect and something that might have been hope. "What would this partnership look like, Ambassador?" "Shared knowledge, shared defense, mutual respect between equals," smiled slightly. "No more talk of primitives and superiors. No more exile for those who are different. A galaxy where every species can grow and learn and become more than they are." "That is a beautiful vision," said. But is it possible? Our peoples have been enemies for a century. Your peoples have been enemies, corrected gently. Humanity has not thought of you as enemies since the day we decided to help you. We chose to see you as fellow beings worthy of protection. Perhaps it is time you made a similar choice about us. In the days that followed, representatives from every council species visited Earth and its colony worlds. They walked through human cities and farms and research stations. They talked with human children and elders, scientists and artists, soldiers and dreamers. They began to see humanity not as the monsters they had been taught to fear, but as people who laughed and cried and hoped just as they did. The ambassador, a wise old serpent named, spent a week on the colony world of New Eden. She watched human farmers tend their fields with the same care that gave to their sacred gardens. She listened to human musicians play songs that brought tears to her many eyes. She shared meals with families who welcomed her into their homes without hesitation. "I was wrong about your people," she told President during their final meeting. "We all were. You have shown us that strength and compassion can exist together. That power can be used to lift others up instead of pushing them down." President smiled warmly. "We are still learning that lesson ourselves, Ambassador. We have made many mistakes and will make many more, but we are trying. That is all anyone can do." The swarm continued to attack, but now they faced a united galaxy. Human ships fought alongside cruisers and assault craft. Energy shields protected mining ships. Species that had been rivals learned to trust each other in battle. And through it all, humanity led not by force but by example. They took the most dangerous missions. They shared their technology freely. They treated every life as precious, regardless of what species it belonged to. The galaxy was changing. The old order of suspicion and isolation was giving way to something new, something better, something that humanity had dreamed of since they first looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone. They were not alone, and now finally neither was anyone else. The war against the swarm lasted 7 long years. 7 years of battles fought in the cold void of space. 7 years of victories and defeats, of heroes and sacrifices, of species learning to fight as one. By the end, the galaxy was forever changed, and so were the beings who lived in it. Admiral George did not survive to see the final victory. In the 5th year of the war, the swarm launched a massive attack on the colony world of Major. 3 billion lives hung in the balance. Admiral led his fleet to defend them, knowing that reinforcements would not arrive in time. The battle lasted 2 days. Ships fought with everything they had, buying precious hours for evacuation shuttles to carry civilians to safety. When his flagship was finally overwhelmed, the admiral sent one last message to his crew. "Get the people out. That is all that matters. It has been an honor serving with you." The flagship exploded in a burst of light that could be seen from the planet's surface. But by then, most of the colonists had escaped. 3 billion lives saved because one man refused to retreat. They built a monument to Admiral on Major. It stood in the center of their capital city, a statue of a human man carved from their sacred blue stone. His face was turned toward the stars, and his expression was one of quiet determination. Beneath the statue, they inscribed words in both human and script. He gave everything so that strangers might live. Captain Rachel Torres was promoted to admiral after his death. She led the combined fleet with the same skill and courage that had defined her entire career. Under her command, the Alliance pushed the swarm back system by system, world by world. But they all knew that destroying individual swarm fleets was not enough. The enemy would simply rebuild and return. To end the war forever, they had to find the swarm's home system and destroy the central intelligence that controlled them. The architect archives contained clues about the swarm's origin. Dr. Laura, now an old woman but still brilliant, spent years piecing together the fragments. She discovered that the swarm had been created by the architects themselves, millions of years ago, as a tool for breaking down dead matter and recycling it into useful materials. But something had gone wrong. The swarm had become corrupted, turning against their creators and driving them to extinction. They have been sleeping in dark space for eons, Laura explained to the War Council, waiting until new civilizations arose, new raw materials to consume. They are not evil in the way we understand evil. They are simply following their programming. But that programming will destroy every living thing in the galaxy if we do not stop them. She showed them the location of the swarm home system. It was far beyond the galactic rim, in a region of space so dark and cold that no living being had visited it in millions of years. The journey would be dangerous. The battle would be even more so. Commander was chosen to lead the assault. He was young for such responsibility, only 32 years old, but he had proven himself in a dozen major engagements. His fleet was made up of ships from every species in the Alliance. Humans and all fighting together under a single banner. The journey to the swarm home system took 3 weeks. Spent much of that time walking among his crews, talking with soldiers from species he had only read about in school. He learned their names and their stories. He shared meals with them and listened to their fears and hopes. "Are you afraid?" asked a young warrior named one evening. Considered the question carefully. "Yes," he admitted. "I am afraid of failing. I am afraid of letting down all the people who are counting on us, but I am not afraid of dying. Death is just a door. What matters is what we do before we walk through it." Was quiet for a moment. Then he clicked his mandibles in what had learned was a smile. "My grandfather voted to exile your people. He thought you were dangerous animals. I wish he could see us now, sitting together as friends." "Maybe he can," said. "Maybe somewhere the ones who came before us are watching. Maybe they are proud of what we have become." The swarm home system was a nightmare of metal and darkness. Thousands of enemy ships orbited a dying star, drawing energy from its fading light. At the center of the swarm was a structure the size of a small moon, covered in lights that pulsed like a heartbeat. The Central Intelligence. "All ships, this is Commander." His voice was calm and steady over the fleet-wide channel. "Today we end this war, not for glory, not for revenge, for every being who has suffered because of the swarm, for everyone who will never have to fear them again. We are the light in the darkness. Let us burn bright." The battle was brutal beyond description. Ships were torn apart. Friends died screaming over communication channels. The swarm fought with the desperation of a wounded animal, throwing everything they had at the Alliance fleet. But the Alliance held. When one ship fell, another took its place. When one species faltered, another stepped forward to cover them. They fought as one people, one galaxy, one will. Pushed his flagship through the chaos, heading straight for the Central Intelligence. His ship took hit after hit, systems failing one by one, but he refused to stop. "Almost there," he muttered through gritted teeth. "Just a little further." The flagship's main cannon fired directly into the heart of the swarm intelligence. For one eternal moment, nothing happened. Then the structure began to crack, light pouring from the fractures. The pulsing heartbeat stuttered and stopped. Across the galaxy, every swarm vessel went dark at the same instant. The machines that had terrorized civilizations for years simply stopped functioning, their controlling intelligence destroyed. Sat back in his command chair and let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Around him, his crew erupted in cheers. Over the communication channels, he could hear celebrations in a dozen languages. The war was over. The galaxy was free. 6 months later, the leaders of every species gathered on Earth for a ceremony unlike any in history. The old Galactic Council had dissolved itself, acknowledging that its time had passed. In its place, a new body was formed, the Galactic Assembly, where every species had an equal voice and an equal vote. President of Earth addressed the assembled representatives. He was a young man, barely 40, chosen by his people for his wisdom and compassion. "We stand here not as conquerors but as partners," he said, his voice carrying across the great hall. "The galaxy once told humanity that we were not worthy. Perhaps that judgment was fair in that moment. But worthiness is not something you are born with. It is something you build with every choice you make." He looked out at the gathered beings, creatures of crystal and scale and chitin, beings of light and shadow, all watching with something that looked like hope. "We have built worthiness through sacrifice and compassion. We have earned our place not by taking but by giving. And now we offer the same opportunity to every species in the galaxy. Join us, build with us, dream with us. Together we can create something beautiful." Ambassador watched from the gallery. She was very old now, kept alive more by will than by medicine. But she had wanted to see this day more than anything. The galaxy had not bowed to humanity. Humanity had simply shown the galaxy how to stand together, how to fight for each other instead of against each other, how to turn exile into purpose and rejection into resolve. As the ceremony concluded and representatives from 100 worlds rose to applaud, closed her eyes and smiled. "We did it, Samuel," she whispered to a man who had been dead for over a century. "We became what you dreamed we could be." Outside the great hall, the sun was setting over a peaceful earth. Children played in parks while their parents watched with quiet contentment. Ships from a dozen worlds moved through the sky, carrying goods and travelers and dreams. The age of fear and isolation was over. The age of unity had begun. And at its heart stood humanity, not as rulers but as guides, showing the galaxy that the greatest power was not the ability to destroy but the courage to love. The stars waited, full of mysteries and wonders yet to be discovered. And humanity, together with their new family, was ready to explore them all.